Hey guys, Chris here with theGoodOldGamer. So today we're going to talk about AMD's GPUs, NVIDIA's GPUs, and why things have felt a bit weird here this generation. And I think there's a couple of different factors going on that make this seem different than what we've seen in the past before. So what it looks like AMD is doing is they're playing the leapfrog game with NVIDIA. Now, we've seen this for the past couple of generations. We saw with, Fiji that came out after the other 300 series Radeons came out. Then we had Vega launch about a year later after Polaris. And now we have RDNA with the 5700 and 5700 XT. There are rumors of the 5600 coming out here in the not too distant future, which are probably based off of the same RDNA 1. And then RDNA 2, which will be in the 5800 and 5900 series coming later this year, maybe. And I'm going to explain why for AMD, they really need it to be later this year, but probably early next year. Now, the reason why things have felt so weird in the graphics card market is because typically over, before these generations, AMD would launch something, their whole lineup, then NVIDIA would launch their whole lineup, and then they'd compete head to head, usually within a few months of each other. They're not always right on at the same time, but not too far apart, within a reasonable amount of time of each other. There were a few generations and a few times where progress and, development took a little longer for one company or the other, but overall, you would have a direct head-to-head match. That hasn't been the case with AMD for a while now. Obviously, they went through some really hard financial times. We all know that with their bulldozer architecture, basically losing the entire CPU market, AMD was having trouble. So they could only really focus in on one little thing at a time, and that's the reason why they had to delay stuff. Also, both Fiji and Vega were essentially just compute cards that were repurposed for gaming in the high end. So they weren't really designed for gaming anyway. So that's the other reason why they took a little bit longer. They were completely different architectures compared to their GCN or their other GCN counterparts. Now, the problem with this is this allows whoever comes out first with their new architecture and lineup to charge pretty much whatever they want. This is what NVIDIA took advantage of this generation. Turing, while impressive, doesn't really move the needle that much from Pascal. I've said this many times before. The 2080 Ti is only 30-ish% faster than the 1080 Ti. So that's not a lot of room there. So that's just moving the needle up only about 30%. I mean, they could have called it a 1090 Ti and just not launched any other Turing cards, and it still would have stuck right into the Pascal stack. So this wasn't very good from NVIDIA. There wasn't a lot of gains there. Even though that they're on the same node, Maxwell was a much better, refresh of an architecture on a same node from its previous generation. So that we didn't get that this time around. And then, of course, NVIDIA, because they were first, decided, hey, we're going to charge as much money as we possibly can. And this is what businesses do. They're always going to charge as much as the market will bear. And it's up to us to tell them whether or not the prices are acceptable by either buying the products or not buying the products. So you can debate pricing all you want, but until people stop buying things, prices will continue to push the limits. And then, like I said, once it gets to a point where people just don't pay it anymore, then prices will be capped at that point. But from the looks of things, they're going to continue to push that upper price tier. And I think AMD is going to actually try to push even higher than NVIDIA. So moving on over to what AMD's doing, obviously Turing's been out for about 9 months now, somewhere around there, 10 months. And they haven't done that well, mostly due to the price to performance not being that special. But they're still selling reasonably well, otherwise prices would be lower. AMD just came out with their RDNA architecture, so they're about 8 to 9 months behind, even on the mainstream stuff, which is what they're targeting first, which means they're going to be about another 6 months behind on the high-end stuff. Now, there's reasons for this. It's supposedly going to be using RDNA 2. RDNA 2 is supposed to be more efficient, so that means probably about 15-20% more efficient, I would assume, compared to RDNA 1. Also have some sort of ray tracing features and stuff like that. So that's the reason why they can't just produce those right now. It's also due to the fact that 7 nanometer is too costly. This is the reason why NVIDIA is not moving to 7 nanometers. It costs too much to build large die and sell them for only a few $100s. Now, if GPUs cost $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, yeah, they'd probably be out if the architecture is ready to go. But I think between those two things, waiting for wafers to get cheaper on 7 nanometers and finishing up their refinement on RDNA 2, I think that's the reason why they have to wait. But they're going to be significantly behind, over a year behind when NVIDIA had launched their RTX 2080 Ti, which was strange to begin with because that launched with the 2080 and 2070. Or actually with the 2080 and the 2070 came out later. Typically they'll launch the 80 class and then the 70 class, and then the Ti comes later on. The reason why NVIDIA couldn't do that this time is because they needed to show an improvement. Imagine if they just launched the RTX 2080 and 2070. Everybody'd be like, these are stupid, why would you ever do this? Because there was no performance gain at either of those levels. So the Ti had to come out at first because it's the only new graphics card this generation, really. So that was pretty weird. And then AMD being late to the party, this is starting to become a trend. And I don't know if AMD is doing this on purpose or if it's just because they're a little bit behind. I'm not really sure what the game plan is, but what it seems like they're going to do is play the leapfrog game. So towards the end of the 2080 Ti's life cycle, we're probably going to see something that competes very well with it and probably beats it. And I'll cover my speculation on that here in a little bit. So I'm assuming the RX 5700 or 5800, XT will probably match or be within a few percentage points of the 2080 Ti. And like I said, that'll come out a little bit over a year after it comes out. NVIDIA's next generation GPUs will likely come out next summer, maybe next fall, somewhere in that range. So about 2 years after Turing's launch. And so that gives AMD a little bit of a window to really kind of beat up on NVIDIA. Then NVIDIA will come out with their new stuff 6, 8 months, 9 months later. And then AMD will go ahead and scale down prices to stay competitive. And then I think they're going to leapfrog them again. And the reason why this is a little bit jarring for us is because we're in a duopoly. There's only 2 companies. So we only have 2 options for GPU manufacturers. And if they're not really competing head to head, that's kind of a problem because that means prices will continue to inflate. Now, I said I believe the 5800 XT will compete very well with the 2080 Ti. I believe the 5900 XT will actually be superior, probably 20-25% faster, basically the same generational leap that we got last time from NVIDIA, and then they're going to charge even more money. I'm figuring the 5900 XT will likely be a $1,500 to $2,000 graphics card, but it will be definitively the best GPU on the market. It will make the 2080 Ti look silly. Now, granted, depending on how far down the 2080 Ti price slides, NVIDIA's prices could go down, but I guarantee you they're going to be above $1,000. They're definitely going to shoot for that, especially if they have the fastest graphics card, if it has some form of ray tracing. Basically, if there's nothing anybody could say out there negative about the card, they're going to charge tippity-top price. Okay, so my thoughts on specs. What seems likely for what, AMD can do here? We know FP32 to FP32, basically NVIDIA or Turing and RDNA, they're pretty much on par. Now, AMD does have the advantage of 7 nanometer, and like I said, I believe RDNA 2 is going to give them an even better efficiency advantage. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing on the back end. So in my mind, I'm figuring about a 15% gain in efficiency will help keep TDP low. So likely the 5800 XT will be a 250 watt TDP card, roughly on par with the 2080 Ti. And more than likely, I could see them launching it for about $699, putting it on par with the RTX 2080, making that card look stupid. And then NVIDIA will have to lower prices to compete. And then what I think AMD will do is they will then slide down again, just like they did with the 5700s. Basically, they'll go with $699 and $599 for the cut-down model. That leaves $499 empty. And what they can do is when NVIDIA does lower prices, they can just slide both of those down $100. That's my guess. Now, as far as specs, for me, it seems pretty straightforward. They're just going to make it 50% bigger. So 50% more CUs. So we'll be looking at, 60 CUs instead of 40. And then we will have 384-bit memory bus, 12 gigabytes of memory, basically 50% across the board over the 5700 XT. it makes sense. It'll scale really well. And then with that efficiency gain of RDNA 2, more than likely that'll let them keep that within the 250 watt TDP range. They'll also probably tweak clocks closer to the regular 5700, as the 5700 XT does pull extra power because of its higher clock speeds, and that'll keep the TDP at a nice, reasonable level, and should be about on par with the 2080 Ti. Now, the RX 5900 XT, I think AMD is really going to go for it. They're going to try to hit the home run. Like I said, they're going to try to hit that over $1,000 mark, have the top tier graphics card, and rake in all those margins. Their architecture is good enough to compete, and since NVIDIA is not really going to want to launch a card to compete with something 25-30% better than a 2080 Ti until their next generation, that gives AMD a bit of a window to have that performance crown. So I'm assuming that'll probably be around 80 CUs. They'll basically double up on the die size, jump that all the way up to 300 watt TDP, maybe a smidge higher. They will, like I said, scale back clocks to go ahead and make sure that it can fit within that TDP rating, and then probably slap on HBM to also help out with power consumption. And because these are going to cost so much, the higher cost of HBM doesn't really matter. It also eliminates the memory bottleneck, going with 16 gigabytes of HBM2 at 1 terabyte per second. I mean, that's plenty. So I think that makes sense in a $100,000 plus graphics card for AMD to do. Like I said, I figure that'll probably be between 20 and 30% faster than the 2080 Ti. And if that's the case, this means that AMD will have the performance crown. They're able to garner all of those really, really high profit margins for a while, and then NVIDIA will come out, they'll go ahead and supersede them, they'll slide their prices down accordingly, and then compete at each level. Then AMD will then once again take over that market, 6 months, a year later, take that high spot, and then once again, NVIDIA, and so on and so forth. I think they'll continue to leapfrog each other over and over again for that really high position in that over $1,000 market. Meanwhile, just sliding everything down, basically one tier each and every single generation. And this makes a lot of sense for AMD to do, because for them, this gives them that performance crown that buys them a lot of goodwill and will buy them a lot of market share. For NVIDIA, this means that they don't have to directly compete so much. They get their time in the spotlight, they get their day in the sun, and then they have to once again slide prices down, still be competitive. And this kind of would probably work out best for both companies long term. Instead, back in the old days, like I mentioned, they'd compete head to head, and that drove prices really, really far down. Remember the R9 290 that came out at $399? It made the entire high end just look really, really stupid and pointless. I don't think either AMD nor NVIDIA really want that anymore. Now, I know this sounds kind of like a collusion type of thing, but I think it's just more marketing. Like, they can both see what each company's doing, and they can kind of figure out how to maximize their own profits. And that's what companies do. They see what the market looks like, and then they figure out where they can slot in to maximize their profits. And by leapfrogging each other, they can go ahead and do that and still continue to get sales because their other parts will be competitive. I don't think the days of the 1080 Ti are going to be coming back. I did this video a week or two ago, basically explaining that the 1080 Ti was an anomaly. That card came out and it was about twice as fast as the 980 Ti. I don't think we're going to be seeing that level of gains anymore. We can see that there's a very harsh diminishing returns. We know new nodes aren't really adding anything to clock speeds, just better efficiency, better density. So it's all going to come down to refinement. So 30% performance gains each generation, basically just replacing the top card of the stack from each company and then just sliding everything else down. Now for AMD, obviously HBM is going to be expensive in that sub $1,000 category. They don't want to do that again. But what they can eventually do, 2 or 3 generations later, replace, their HBM cards with GDDR cards as GDDR gets faster, and it'll look like a whole new lineup. And with all the changes and stuff, they could certainly do that, much like what they did with the 5700 XT, essentially replacing Radeon 7. So that's my thoughts. I think that's the way that the graphics card market's going. It looks like upgrades aren't going to be as necessary as they've been in the past. This is both a good and a bad thing. This means that if you spend a lot of money on a graphics card, instead of it being relegated to mid-range or low end within a generation or two, it'll just slide down slowly over, the course of 5 or 6 years. So if you buy something like a 2080 Ti, that's definitely still going to be very good 5 years from now. Unlike something like a 780 Ti really wasn't so good, 5 years on. I mean, last year would be 5 years from the 780 Ti. It really wasn't that great. But the 980 Ti was still okay, but that'd be considered kind of mid-range last year, or low end almost. I just don't think that they want to do that anymore because the gains aren't there to allow for that. So they're really trying to cement that really high premium price point where they can maximize their margins and come out with technologies that are really expensive to produce. So this way they can have gains each and every single year or every other year or however long these new generations are going to last. Personally, I think each GPU generation is going to be 2.5 years now. But we'll have to wait and see. There could be brand new technology. They could have massive architectural increases, but I think that both companies have kind of realized that they're kind of getting to that point where things aren't going to change a lot, so they're going to maximize what they can do. This is just my thoughts. I think this is the way that the GPU market's going to be going. There are rumors that there are going to be other competitors, like ARM coming in. Now, we do know Intel will be joining into the fray. That could change things up a little bit, but honestly, I don't think either one of those are going to be as disruptive, at least on the high-end spot. Maybe in the mid-range and the lower end, they can go ahead and add more competition and lower prices a bit. But honestly, I don't see them really being able to overthrow companies that have been making GPUs for decades now, and pretty much running the market overnight. But they could, and that could change everything. But for right now, I think that this is the way that things are going to go. We're just going to see, 25, 30% performance gains each generation. Everything just slides down a little bit. And AMD and NVIDIA, instead of going head-to-head, they're just going to leapfrog each other. Upside to that is prices will scale down more regularly, which means if you do need to upgrade for whatever reason, the prices should come down a little bit quicker and at a more regular interval, but the performance gains just aren't going to be as high. So there's a good and a bad to this situation, but overall, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's okay. And personally, I kind of like the idea of not needing to upgrade near as often. This means you get to save money, which is a good thing. And with everybody out there talking about the financial sector, I've been having some issues on the stock market. It's going kind of nuts. So who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of years. So not needing to invest money into parts isn't necessarily a bad thing. That's just kind of my thought. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. If you like this video, please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Please share with friends. That really does help me out. And if you want to help support the channel for as little as $1 a month, you can become a patron over on Patreon. We can chat about this kind of stuff in Discord. And I really do appreciate you guys. That's all I have for today. And I will catch you guys in the next video.